Welcome to another Speaking of Steel podcast. It's great to have you guys back on with us. Michelle Curtin, steel market analyst with a slant towards stainless steel. Welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
It's been a while, so
It has been a
plenty
while.
to talk about today. Jon Carruthers-Green, familiar face.
Here as ever.
Here as ever. Thanks for joining us. Again, there's a few subject matters in today's topical debate, which we've spoken about before. We'll expand upon, but really we're focusing on the EU's clean industrial deal, which was announced just in recent days. So it's quite fresh in the mind. We've taken a little bit of time to read around the subject as best we can, and hopefully we can summarise what that's going to mean for people in the steel industry in the coming months and years. Jon, I mean, as I say, we've taken that time to look through the documentation from the European Commission. What is it that you've identified about this clean industrial deal that is going to probably affect most directly the steel industry?
Most directly and most immediately, my eye was immediately drawn to the issue around energy prices. For the past couple of years now, prices in Europe have been so much higher than anywhere else. They quote it there sort of between 2 and 4 times higher than the US and Asia, which naturally causes problems for European steel producers. So any kind of effort towards reducing those prices has got to help. A little bit further down the list, I also noticed that the labelling around carbon intensity of emissions is going to be targeting the steel industry first. That's actually going to start this year. It's going to be a sort of a voluntary measure, and it's going to be. I guess it's trying to support the whole of the decarbonisation process. It's all about labelling this material correctly in order to really sort of feel that green premium's earned.
Is that going to be like an energy scale that we see on a tumble dryer or something like that?
I think it's going to be something very similar. Yeah. One of the things that we've heard for years now is that nobody's entirely sure what we call green steel. Where do you draw those boundaries? And a whole range of people have come up with their own sort of level scale. So actually getting this sort of codified at a European-wide level has got to be a good thing. Everybody's been doing this slightly differently, and as a result, you're never really sure whether the steel you're buying is green steel or not. So a bit more guidance around this, and then also with the labelling, it sort of actually rewards those steelmakers who are able to produce with less emissions. I think that's got to be a good thing too.
Yeah, because like for stainless, the production of stainless in the electric arc furnace is quite green anyway because of the recycled scrap input. I mean, Outokumpu was at 95%, so it's all very green anyway. Compared to traditional blast furnace production, so it would be good to have some kind of, I guess, labelling system of how green it is.
Yeah, and it should be recognised that they shouldn't have to go to any other measures because they're already doing what's expected. But as I say, just before that, it's got to be the energy prices is the big one.
Yeah,
I think at the moment.
Yeah, and Michelle, it's good that we've got you here because it's quite apparent that stainless steel in one sense is very much ahead of the game in terms of its recycling policies, the way it draws material back from manufacturing sectors and back into its furnaces, and also its experience of managing energy use as well. Do you think there are lessons to be learnt from the stainless steel side of the steel industry?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the scrap recycling is just one side. It's still quite energy intensive, the electric arc furnace, so they do need help with the energy prices. And obviously, if they can get the energy prices down, that will immediately bring the production price down overall, and just make Europe much more competitive globally in their cost price of producing steel, and just give them the help that they need to be competitive.
So I think the aim of the European Commission continues to be to have a decarbonised industry across the board by 2050, isn't it? I mean, I guess a lot of that, if we're talking about energy at the moment, has to be a big push towards renewables. John, is that going to be central to the things that they're proposing in this deal?
Renewables, electrification, those are words that repeatedly came up in these documents. One of the ways they're looking to reduce these prices is by increasing sort of output of renewable electricity. So they're currently targeting something like 100 gigawatts of new capacity coming on every year until 2030, and then I think it increases even further beyond that. So we're going to see more of this energy being produced from renewable sources, which is also going to be a good thing for the steel industry. You need you need large quantities of steel to produce these wind turbines, and we mentioned it before. It could be sort of the form of sort of like a virtuous circle, where we see that more of this electricity is produced in a green manner, and more of the steel that's being used to build these turbines is being produced in a green manner. And I guess the commission's hoping that they're gonna develop things this way.
Yeah, I think we previously touched on it before with the podcast that we did with H2 Green Steel about perhaps moving steel production around Europe to places where renewables are more prevalent. H2 Green Steel clearly making use of that in Sweden. Do you think we'll see that shift accelerate as a result of these targets?
Well, that's it. Does the steel go to where the electricity is produced, or does the electricity start getting produced where the steel is? That's. I think we're going to see a bit of both, really.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Michelle, through my reading of these documents, there was also quite a bit of mention about, at least in the shorter term, the reliance on gas to produce electricity. I guess there are opportunities there for steelmakers, particularly in stainless, to help make the EU more resilient from a gas point of view as well, and get that infrastructure put in place.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the reliance on Russia has been an issue, especially for Germany. I mean, they've really been impacted by the reduction of gas coming in. A lot of it's been picked up by LNG imports coming in from the US. Obviously, the situation with the US is changing now as well, so maybe that's not quite as as reliable as it was. So there is a lot of infrastructure development in new gas pipelines as well, which again, like John said, is a bit like the wind turbines. It's a bit of a circular effect. The pipelines need the steel. The steel will help. The pipelines will then help get the gas to where it needs to be.
It's another opportunity where, as John says, it ties in, doesn't it? If we can make the energy greener, we can make steel making greener, then there's an opportunity to increase demand as well, I suppose, isn't there, into these projects that'll
Yeah.
make things more sustainable in the long term.
Yeah, I mean that's one big thing with the need to increase demand in Europe as well. All these initiatives are great, but you've got to have the demand as well, and a lot of these projects will help. Certainly, with the pickup in demand in Europe over the coming decades, probably.
Yeah, yeah, and I think part of this plan is to create those lead industries for green materials, for green products. John, what do they mean when they talk about a lead sector?
So what we're really going to see is this promotion of requirements for cleaner, greener, decarbonised steel really be sort of made sort of sector specific. We've seen sort of much smaller schemes when we're looking at, say, the construction industry in certain countries, or actual sort of voluntary targets within industries. So looking specifically, say, that the automotive industry at the moment, currently their targets are voluntary. But what will end up happening is this legislation is going to sort of reduce that voluntary element, and make it sort of much more mandatory. And it's going to be those industries, like I say, like construction, like automotive, which are heavy steel users, that are going to be primarily going to be affected by this. Also, this, like I say, the steel industry itself has been specifically sort of pointed out. This is one of the reasons that they're targeting the steel industry to start this voluntary labelling this year. Exactly how far that goes this year, we'll see. But with all of these rules, all of these restrictions, they're only going to get tighter. This isn't going to go away.
Yeah, and it's got to be pushed by the governments because given a choice, people will always go, especially in a market like we've got at the minute where, profit margins are really low, demand's really low. It's got to be driven by infrastructure-led government public projects and specified. It's got to start with them pushing it forward because given a choice, people will always go with the cheaper option. We all like to think that we're environmentally conscious, but does everybody want to pay an extra £100 for a slightly greener made washing machine? You've got to incentivize it and push it through from the very top to get everybody in line and make it work. It's got to filter through the whole supply chain.
Yeah, so we've surveyed our research partners specifically about sort of green steel, and one of the comments that kept sort of coming up again and again and again was this need for increased guidance, increased legislation, and almost a reward for this green steel. At the moment, we talk about the sort of the green steel premium. I think ideas such as this intensity labeling is really sort of meant to reward those people that do go after that, because there are consumers out there that do care about it. So why not? Certainly, like with the stainless industry, why not go with your credentials and put them first and foremost?
Yeah, I think certainly seen that from the stainless mills, especially after Kumpo.
Mm.
They really do kind of push the fact that they have this circular and sustainable working practice. And I think obviously we'll start to see more and more of that as we move ahead.
Do you think we'll see legislation on carbon and probably stainless as well, just to manage scrap exports out of the EU?
Yeah, so the more I guess recycled scrap input the steel makers are using, that's going to put quite a big pressure. And there has been a couple of questions over the last few years: is there going to be enough scrap in Europe to facilitate it? And the answer most people would probably give is no, there isn't, because we do export a huge amount of it. Whether that will be capped by legislation, I think it's certainly something that they will have to consider in the coming years, to be able to sustain the volume of scrap that we will need for production in Europe.
Yeah, it's going to become a vital resource as much as any other raw material in the process, and
Yeah.
to be exporting it to mainly Turkey, I think is one of the largest sort of destinations for both European and US scrap. We've already heard that there's going to be some tightening of legislation about these exports from the US. One of the laws that's being sort of introduced as part of this Green Deal in the EU is also specifically designed to look at this circularity. So I think it won't be long before we find some kind of I don't know, maybe like a reverse safeguard system for exports of scrap.
Yeah, I mean, one of the big issues that they've had recently is obviously because demand is so low, we're not generating as much scrap as we normally would, which means that there is less scrap generally available for steelmakers. And when we're exporting quite a large percentage of that, the balance has got to be right for what the steelmakers need, because when demand does pick up and they do need more scrap, it could potentially cause more supply problems.
On the face of it, recycling more being more sustainable, getting your energy from wind and solar sounds a great idea, but is there a risk that Europe sort of becomes a bubble where in pursuing these green policies, their costs of production actually rise and you're probably exposed to more external markets than you would like?
Definitely. There's no global consensus on how to deal with decarbonisation, and it's something that Europe really is sort of, as a region, is leading on. So of course there's going to be that risk of production elsewhere being a lot cheaper because they can do it without these additional restrictions. CBAM, I hate to bring it up yet again. Okay, I don't. I love to bring it up yet again. Is really designed to. Okay, I'm going to say it again. It's to level the playing field when it comes to these additional problems that are going to face European steelmakers. Without something like that, then yes, the European steel industry is going to be wide open. Will CBAM in its current sort of format be enough?
I don't think so. I don't think CBAM on its own is enough to level but it will help level the playing field, as in from a cost point of view for the producers, but it won't help protect them from the imports. What we'll probably find is that countries start sending in their more energy green steel into Europe, and the dirtier produced steel will start filtering through into other countries. So there will just be a bit of a shift maybe in um, the supply of material that starts coming to Europe. Again, for stainless, even the import material coming in is fairly green already, so it's probably going to have even less of an impact there. But essentially, we're still going to need something along the lines of the safeguards to stop, the volume of imports
Yeah.
growing.
So when the European Commission says leveling the playing field for CBAM, this is for things that haven't even sort of totally started to affect the industry yet. You're still going to have that issue with the overcapacity in Asia. You're still going to have a lot of imports being sent into the region, and the CBAM's not really designed to deal with that. There's going to have to be something else. If we're looking to specifically protect the European steel industry, there's going to have to be something else.
Yeah, I mean the biggest thing with CBAM, really, from the feedback from the people that we speak to, is that for them it's more of an administration burden. It's complicated. It's there's a lot of paperwork involved in it. Obviously, the proposed changes will help simplify it and it will reduce some of that burden. But then we're talking about 80% of companies being exempt from CBAM
Yeah, so I understand. Yeah,
reporting anyway. I mean, the report says that the remaining 20% account for the majority of the carbon emissions anyway. So, but it's just targeting the big companies then. But yeah, what impact it will have is not going to be
so there is a time
enough.
scale in here, John, isn't there, for some review and perhaps
Yeah, I mean,
simplification of the CBAM
it's going to
regulations?
be reviewed regularly. We've just had what sort of the results of one review that Michelle just sort of touched on there. What I think though is it's not going to affect the steel industry so much. I think a lot of the rules that they mentioned were about um, removing everybody else that was sort of swept up in something that was sort of specifically designed to sort of target the steel industry. So there's been changes to the de minimis rules, so the minimum amounts you're allowed to import before CBAM charges will kick in. That's gone up from 150 euros worth of material in a year to approximately 100 tons of steel a year. So that's not going to be the kind of people that are big players in the steel industry. This is going to be
the
smaller.
people that we monitor a
Exactly,
lot of the time.
yeah. It's going to be much more sort of smaller, much more niche kind of importers that were really sort of cut up with this. So I think for the industry as a whole, that's not going to have much of a change. The one bit that will be a big sort of change, certainly at the beginning, is so the actual charges were due to start from January 2026. They're going to have to purchase the CBAM certificates every quarter, um, based on the sort of the current ETS price. So what's going to happen now is that those certificates, those charges will still need to be paid, but they're actually going to be paid in 2027. So there's going to be a delay of a year for the
Okay.
actual financial implications. That's probably the big bit, I'd say, for the industry. So what essentially was going to happen was you were going to pay for about 2.5% of your carbon emissions in that first year, and then 5% in the second year. That's all being lumped together from 2027, and then from then that's going to rise every year until 2034 at the moment. But we've already seen delays at the start. I'd fully expect to see delays at the other end.
Yeah, yeah. It sounds like the European Commission will have quite a windfall in 2027. So I understand they've also put back the automotive emissions mandate, the payments anyway, to 2027. So yeah, there might be a lot of income from those things, but at a delayed date, it does give people scope to make that adjustment, doesn't it?
Hopefully, yeah. I think they've really taken on board the fact that it is a very bureaucratic process. It is something that means a lot more sort of administration. We've had so many questions from people asking for just advice, just for our knowledge about CBAM.
Yeah, some people have, have trained staff. Some people have employed extra staff, and some people are actually relying on third parties to make sure that all the paperwork's correct and submitted. I think the freight forwarders have picked up quite a bit of, the administration side as well. I mean, if you're lucky enough to be buying from a supplier that, has all this information, then I think it's a much more straightforward process. But if you're buying from companies that don't, that's, I think, where it gets really complicated.
Yeah, I mean it's quite clear that through the contacts that we speak to, there's a lot of repercussions for all these green initiatives, the decarbonisation,
Yeah,
the
everything comes
application
with
of
a
CBAM.
cost.
Yeah,
And when you're in an economy like we have at the minute, where, stockists, traders, end users, everybody's really struggling to make money. Um, it's a hard time to be implementing things that cost more money. When the market's great and demand's brilliant, and people are making loads and loads of money, then people are a lot more inclined to get on board with all these different incentives and initiatives. But at the minute, everything's just adding to the cost burden of the, like the electricity costs and wage increases. Businesses are throughout the supply chains, including the steelmakers, are under so much cost pressure at the minute from various different things. It's just a really hard time, I think, for them to be picking up on all these extra
Yeah,
decarbonisation.
and these are extra costs before we even start paying for these
Yeah,
CO2 emissions. So
yeah. So what do they do? Are we going to start to see price increases because they have to start trying to cover some of these costs? Or are we going to be looking at a situation where we need the governments to step in, I guess, and help push some of these incentives forward with, financial support to help get them moving.
I think Michelle makes really good points there, and it's clearly feedback that we're getting from the sector. John, what's your impression of how much is the EU Clean Industrial Deal paying lip service to the fact that it needs to make the industry more competitive, or are there policies in here that will actually boost industry at the same time as decarbonising it?
I think what they're trying to do with this is increase that demand for greener products, for cleaner material. That's certainly one of the key points they're trying to do, and it's going to be very difficult without that increase in demand for prices to increase in a manner where we can actually sort of pay for this.
Yeah.
I think this is generally going to put a sort of an upward pressure on prices over the next few years. And I'm kind of worried that this is going to be something that's going to be just Europe specific. It was very hard to get everybody within the region to agree to this to begin with. Now try and export that to other countries around the world whose priorities are completely different and impose that on them. It's going to be very difficult.
Well, this is, I'll throw the grenade in. I'll do the penalty of 10 push-ups after we've finished recording. It's fine. I'll mention Donald Trump and the direction of the US. If Europe is still sticking to its guns, going to decarbonise industry by its original target, does that undermine EU's ability to export to the US and other markets which are seemingly less concerned with these issues?
I think there's definitely going to be an issue in the short term with exports going to the US with the 25% tariff there. That's going to cause an immediate problem. There was about 3.5 million tons of steel leaving the EU going into the US that was exempt from this from this tariff. That's stopped, or is going to stop as of March 12th. I do see some positive signs, though, for Europe from this. There's been all sorts of worry. There's been all sorts of thought for how do we put in a scheme that is going to follow up the safeguard measures, which are due to expire June 2026. Trump could be the perfect excuse. The extension of the 232 tariffs in the US could be the perfect counterpoint for the EU to introduce or extend, or exactly how it's going to turn out. That's up to lots of very expensive lawyers to work out. But it gives them the perfect excuse to continue to protect the European industry.
Michelle, do you think it's a concern for, I guess, particularly for Europe's stainless steel makers, that costs might rise as part and parcel of decarbonisation going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think any form of cost increases are a concern for any steel makers at the minute. They're just not in a position where they're making enough money to have the luxury of being able to cover, all these incentives. And um, we're obviously seeing a bit of a global shift now with trade anyway, as a result of obviously Trump's reinstatement of the 232 25% without any exclusions. Like the stainless plate steel makers in Europe, they ship into America, and they're no longer going to be competitive. Some of my US contacts are already saying that they've had meetings cancelled with some of their European suppliers, because they just won't be competitive under the 25% unless there are some negotiations that happen. So in that respect, I think it's going to be a bit of a double whammy, because they're going to have to rely more on domestic purchasing within Europe because their export opportunities to the US have been decreased, at the same time as trying to implement new measures that will increase cost. The only thing that they may make, I guess, take advantage from is the lower electricity prices, which is quite a big thing actually, which would hopefully help them bring their production costs down, and make them, I guess, more competitive against the imports coming in to Europe still.
Yeah, feels like quite a long-term plan at the moment, doesn't it? I mean, I guess there should be a real sense of urgency injected into all of this so that we get those gains back
Yeah, I
nice and
think it's
quick.
just adding to what is already a very uncertain market with, demand particularly impacted with the uncertainty. It's all just adding extra uncertainties into a very weak market, um, along with what's happening in the US as well. It's just all not helping the
Yeah,
the
Yeah.
situation in
lot to
Europe.
watch.
And while
Yeah.
this was announced in February, it is going to take time for the effects to actually sort of happen. We've got the move fast and break things approach in the US. It's very different in Europe. We've got this package of legislation, this plan, which is going to take several years to we're really going to see the results of, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I say it every time we're sort of summarising things. I think the best thing to do is we'll keep watching on behalf of everyone else, keep reporting on what the steel market's doing, what crucially steel prices are doing, and try and keep on top of things. But Michelle, thank you very much for joining us again
Welcome.
on Speaking of Steel. John, thanks again
Thank you.
for taking part, and a really good discussion and some great insight today. I think we all mentioned Donald Trump though, so we should all probably go and do push-ups now. Until then, until the next time. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks.